Canucks trade rumors are already escalating as Vancouver has been linked to an elite center to solve their top six issue, and what it'll take to make it happen is very optimistic when looking at the implications involved. We're going to be breaking down all that in this episode of Canucks Digest, so first make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon. You guys did a great job of getting us to 7,000 subscribers, so now the road to 8 continues. And with that, let's hop straight into the first topic of the day, which is Canucks linked to elite center. So as we have been seeing around the NHL, is that following the frustration Dylan Larkin showed at his end of season press conference with the Detroit Red Wings management, he becomes a possible target for the Vancouver Canucks to trade for, with the hopes of adding a true top six centerman. And this is coming from an article from Canucks Army if you guys want to go and check it out. A lot of great insight in there, and we're going to dive into what the report had to say right here today. Now, initially, Dylan Larkin, he was very upset with Detroit not making a move at the trade deadline. So the player that was previously considered untouchable, especially when looking at the contract size he has and the amount that's with it that we're going to get into at the end of this video, you would think that, okay, it's not going to be available. This isn't a dream for the Canucks. And now this is something that could potentially happen because of how unhappy he is with Detroit, despite having a very lengthy contract there. He might be wanting out of the Motor City, and Vancouver would be the perfect place for him to come. And then you look at his speed, certainly the first thing that jumps off the page, which would be a much needed addition to the Canucks top six. Larkin's goal scoring is underrated, and he's an excellent playmaker at the NHL level. Though he hasn't played a single playoff game since his rookie year in the 2016 playoffs, he proved this year at the Four Nations face-off that he is capable of rising to the occasion in big games against the league's top players, where he led the tournament in points with 7 in 5 games. So the big thing here, I think, with Larkin is that, yeah, he hasn't been back to the playoffs since his rookie season, but he's been on a terrible rebuilding Detroit team that is starting to get themselves out of the gutter a little bit as far as trying to make a run at the playoffs and things like that. However, it seems like not enough to make Dylan Larkin happy, and it goes to show that with the Four Nations performances, if he's on a team with playmakers, with great players, he's able to absolutely excel, especially when you look at his stats that we're going to look at right here. You see his numbers, even on a dismal Detroit team that was a borderline fringe playoff team for the past few seasons, here making appearances here and there, but looking at that as well, 79 points, 69, 70, 69, all in the past 4 seasons. Absolutely insane numbers. You do have the COVID year there where it was a bit of a dip, but even then before that, he was still at 45 points, 32, 63, 73, 53. This is a guy who can score goals, and this is what the Canucks need, and this is exactly what would fix those problems at the center position. They talked about it at the press conference, how Patrik Allvin was saying how they don't know if the free agent market is really where they can go as far as getting another center. We know that Pius Suter, they're probably going to extend him. Brock Boeser, unfortunately, he's probably leaving, as much as this Canucks fan does not want to admit it, but if extend Pius Suter, you have him as your third center. The perfect fits for Larkin is he can compete with Pettersson for the Canucks top line center spot. However, assuming Pettersson takes some steps this offseason to get back to his game, we can pencil in Larkin as the team's second line centerman. On the Canucks' second line, Larkin would be a great fit with Nils Höglander on one of his wings. The pair would play a ton of speed and would be a tough matchup for any opposing defense off the rush. Alongside the two, Brock Boeser would be a great fit, although probably not likely that he's returning. Another good fit on the right wing would be Kiefer Sherwood. Sherwood is not an ideal second line winger, but his speed and shot would make him a solid fit on a line with Larkin and Höglander. And I absolutely love this idea of seeing Larkin, Höglander, and Sherwood, because then you have two guys with speed that can score, and you have a guy who not only can score, but he is an absolute bull, setting the single season hits record last season in the NHL. It's exactly why Vancouver brought him here, and he filled those shoes perfectly, and along the way, he was scoring a lot of goals. He was one of our top goal scorers last season. Would that translate into next season if we bring in some more playmakers where the puck isn't getting spread around as much, or guys aren't needing to step up in place of big names? Maybe not. However, he's still going to be scoring goals and getting rally started. He had a few multi-goal games this past season as well. So he is definitely someone who is capable of being a top 6 winger when on the right line combination. I think Larkin and Höglander would be great. I do think Höglander and Pettersson is still a really good combo because those guys have such great chemistry. But this is something that would be a massive speed and muscle line, because you would have Larkin and Höglander being massive speedsters who can score, but then Kiefer Sherwood absolutely punishing guys in the offensive zone and on the back check like we saw him do last season. So that is a really interesting look at if you're seeing that Dylan Larkin goes on to the second line. If he goes on to the first line, Pettersson getting bumped down to the second, who knows? But if that is the case, whether it's Dylan Larkin on the first or second line, Pius Suter as a 3 center is an absolute sneaky thing that teams would not be expecting, because Pius Suter, you can make a case that he could be a top 1 center at any team really right now, or a team in the right scenario. Definitely a number 2 center. Absolutely. He earned that this past season, filling in for Elias Pettersson as our number 1 center. So if you have a guy who's definitely worthy of being a number 2 center or even a number 1 center on any given team, and you have him as your number 3 center, that is back to the depth that this Vancouver Canucks team was so successful with 2 seasons ago when they won the Pacific Division. Rick Tocchet won the Jack Adams, Quinn Hughes won the Norris Trophy, and we were 1 game away from the Western Conference Final. So if you're able to do this, where we have the depth and we're not having to have AHL player B or AHL player C playing in that 3rd and 4th center position. I'm not giving any disrespect to those guys. I'm just saying that we have a revolving door of AHL prospects that we bring into that. And then you have Teddy Bluger on the 4th one as that 4th center. I'm not upset about that at all. I think that's a really solid center depth where you have Pettersson, Larkin, Suter, and then Bluger. I think that's a really solid center lineup for any team, really, especially for this Canucks team that has more playmakers on their forwards and in their back end than just those guys as well. So we have other guys who can score goals. Meanwhile, those 4 centers would be holding things down in the middle and in the face-off circle. But what do you guys think about the possibility of Dylan Larkin coming to Vancouver? And is this something that you guys would love to see? Let us know what you guys have to say down in the comments below. But that's going to take us into our second topic of the day, which is what would it take? Now, trading for Larkin might be a challenge as the player has a no-trade clause. However, his connection to Quinn Hughes, both being University of Michigan alums, and former Red Wing Filip Hronek, could entice him to waive his clause if the Canucks called the Red Wings about a trade. Now, some ideas of who could be involved in that trade. Getting the Red Wings to accept an offer is going to be the real challenge. Larkin is the team's captain, number 1, a Michigan native who has been the face of the franchise for almost 10 years, but GM Stevie Yzerman has never been afraid of making big moves. This deal starts with either defenseman Elias Pettersson or Tom Willander. The Red Wings might be more intrigued by Pettersson because they have Mo Seider and Axel Sandin Pellikka on the right side in their organization and are lacking in the young NHL defenseman on the left. Along with Pettersson, the Canucks would have to add a pair of picks, including their 2025 first pick, which will likely be this year's 15th overall pick, and a young centerman like Aatu Räty. This is where it kind of gets a little tricky for the Canucks, because as much as I want to see Dylan Larkin in Vancouver, and I think it could be realistic if you are giving this up for him, looking at Elias Pettersson, DPD, I'm saying junior, the season that he had this season with the breakout that he had and how he definitely earned himself a permanent roster spot, even Aatu Räty as well, those guys will be Vancouver Canucks next season permanently if they don't get traded. Now with that, with them performing well, that's the scary thing about being an AHL prospect or a young rookie, is that if you perform really well, there's a big risk that you're going to get traded for a guy who's already proven commodity in the NHL in future considerations. So that's where excelling as an AHL prospect almost puts a target on your back in a good and bad sense, for sure, because other teams could be wanting to poach you from that team and get your assets for a for sure thing, or your own team could be trying to get you for something better in return as a proven commodity rather than an emerging star. It's not to say that these guys aren't going to be great players in the NHL. I definitely think that if Vancouver keeps them, they're going to really excel, especially DPD. But DPD and Tom Willander are 2 guys that Mark and I, if you guys have been watching the show long enough, you know that we are so hyped about these guys, especially Tom Willander on Mark's side. Him and Jonathan Lekermacki, those are his best 2 prospects that he is absolutely loving. Anthony Romani would be mine, so it's going to be a few years before we see him break out into Abbotsford and Vancouver. But with these 2 prospects, with DPD and Tom Willander, I think it's very scary because of the future, and you don't know what those guys are going to hold. But Dylan Larkin, yes, he is a bit older at 28 years old and in on a big contract. Looking at that contract, you're 2 of 8, 8.7. But if you lose Brock Boeser, you don't have the money that you don't need to go pay him that money. And if you sign Pius Suter, it still will leave a little bit of cap to work with. However, taking on that Larkin contract would be a big hit for the Canucks, especially when they don't necessarily have the most wiggle room to work with this season. But giving up a draft pick and one of your best prospects is, yes, obviously if you're going out and getting a 70-point or a 60-point scorer, you're going to have to give up a lot for him. But with that, that's going to make it very tricky for the Vancouver Canucks, because if you're giving up two guys that are going to be future stars, or one of two guys that will be future stars for your franchise, one that's already emerging as a potential future defensive star, that's where it gets tricky for Vancouver, because you're going to do that and invest in a guy who is a goal scorer, is an elite center, is a face of a franchise, has played with Quinn Hughes and Filip Hronek, has a great chemistry with those guys, and is a Michigan native as well, so you can throw extra salt in the wound on Detroit's part. With that, you could be giving up a lot to get a player like that, who is 28 years old, on a big contract with a lot of money and a lot of term, where if he doesn't see the end of that contract, that's where Vancouver fans and the Vancouver Canucks are going to be kicking themselves in the ass, because they had a future and they just gave it away. So that's the scary thing. And it's always a scary thing with draft picks and with prospects, and trying to trade guys who are just emerging, who aren't exactly proven yet, for a known commodity. That is the risk that you run, and that is the risk that Vancouver is probably going to be wagering over the next couple of months as we head more and more into the offseason, or in the next few weeks until free agency hits, where if Brock Boeser leaves or they extend Pius Suter, or Pius Suter walks, we could be seeing the Vancouver Canucks come knocking on the Detroit Red Wings door a lot sooner than we think. But what do you guys think about all of this? What would you guys give up in order to get Dylan Larkin if you are wanting him to come to Vancouver? If you guys don't want him to come to Vancouver, let us know why you think why. If it's because of what we'd have to give up in return for him, or for other reasons, let us know down in the comments down below. But that's going to do it for this episode of Canucks Digest. I've been your host, Griffin. Take care.